The night split open with a single message that turned gravity sideways. Maya said, "I hired a lawyer. Omar. It is done." Silence roared in their Karachi flat as the ceiling fan beat a tired rhythm. Omar stared at the blue glow, feeling his ribs become a cage. He said, "You hired someone to speak for you when you could have spoken to me." Her typing bubbles appeared, then died, like promises losing breath. The phone pinged again, a PDF icon grinning like a stamped verdict. Maya said, "This is not war. It is distance." He remembered their wedding photo, and how they leaned inward, as if the future were a secret between them. Across the street, thunder stacked over the sea, and rain pressed against the glass. Omar whispered to the empty room, "Then I will speak for myself." He opened a blank document and felt something stubborn wait. The shock did not cool him. It clarified him. Dawn smudged the sky the color of metal, and with it came the ache of decisions. Omar brewed tea and read the email again, searching for softness that was not there. He said, "If she wants process, she will get process." The words tasted like iron, but they steadied his hand. The ceiling fan clicked, a metronome for hard choices. He opened the court website and traced steps like a pilgrim learning a new prayer. Maya said, "Do not make this vindictive." He said, "I will make it proper." He noted service rules, addresses, and timetables, as if mapping a coastline. Each clause carried weight, and he lifted them without flinching. The shock had not passed, but it now had rails to run on. He saved a checklist and set a deadline for his own courage. At the courthouse portal, words rose like walls, but Omar read until a doorway appeared. The procedures were stern and exact, yet they promised fairness if honored. A chat window opened and a clerk bot offered blunt maps. He said, "I can follow rules even when hearts do not." He printed forms, each page a rung on a ladder away from helplessness. Maya said, "We can still be humane." He said, "This is humane. We will not ambush. We will notify." He drafted a motion that asked for time, clarity, and decorum. The printer rattled like distant drums, and the stack grew. Fear paced his ribs, but found the exit blocked by duty. He stapled the pages and wrote the caption with careful letters. The address box blinked, waiting for a name that now lived between them. Omar typed the lawyer's details as if writing coordinates for a storm. Mr. Khanna said, "I represent Maya from this moment forward," in the letterhead's clean voice. Omar said, "Then meet me in court where procedure is sunlight." He queued emails but chose the certified path, print heavy and undeniable. The envelope's glue tasted of decisions that cannot be unsent. He recorded each step in a small notebook, proof against self-doubt. Maya said, "Please do not hurt him to hurt me." He said, "I will only insist he stand where I can see him." The pen's scratch steadied him better than sleep could. By late afternoon, the rain cleared and the city sharpened into edges. Omar pressed the papers into a folder and felt the weight as a boundary. He said, "I will serve what fairness demands, and nothing more." The mirror confirmed a man who had chosen a road with signs every few yards. Maya said, "If this is the way, meet me there without cruelty." He nodded to a room that would keep her echo safe. The courthouse clock on his screen promised a hearing where voices would not hide. He rehearsed the words he would say, and they tasted clean. He closed the folder and held still until the air settled. The shock had become a stance, and the stance was his. Morning rose hard and gray over the city courts, and the air smelled like wet brick. Omar counted his breaths as he cleared security and held his folder like a vow. He said, "Name, case number, purpose," rehearsing the gatekeeper's script. The guard waved him through with a glance that measured nerves more than papers. Hallways stretched like timelines that refused to bend. He paused at a directory and traced the floor plan with a steady finger. Maya said, "We can settle without drama." He said, "I am removing the drama by putting it on record." Rainwater ticked from the eaves, a metronome for decisions. He walked past stamp vendors and black-coated advocates who floated like crows. Mr. Khanna's name stared from the notice in bold, calm type. Omar said, "We will speak in sunlight, not in shadows." The courthouse swallowed the rest of his fear and returned it as steps. The filing counter glowed with fluorescent honesty and stacks of rules. Clerk lifted a brow that had seen every kind of panic. Clerk said, "Affidavit on top, index behind, stamps here." Omar ordered pages like rails on a bridge he refused to look down from. He said, "Service by hand on counsel today and by mail as backup." The clerk weighed him as if measuring intention. Clerk said, "Procedure cares for clean footprints, not loud stories." He nodded and pressed the stamp until the ink sang. Maya said, "Do not turn this into a spectacle." He said, "I am turning it into a record." The cash drawer slammed with a metallic period. The receipt slid into his folder like armor. He wrote the time in his notebook because the future forgets. In the south corridor, fan blades chopped the silence into nervous pieces. Mr. Khanna arrived with a tide of junior associates and the authority of polished shoes. Omar stepped forward, shoulders aligned with his purpose. He said, "Service upon counsel in open court premises." Mr. Khanna said, "You may email, but if you insist, mark me serve." The envelope transferred like a hot coal, neither would drop. A bailiff watched with the patience of stone. Omar noted the time as if pinning a storm to a map. "Die." Mr. Khanna said, "Civility costs less than theater." Omar said, "Civility is why I am here." The corridor seemed to widen, as if rules had made room for breath. Paper rustled, and the conflict clicked into place. The courtroom smelled of paper, polish, and old arguments. A judge took the bench and the room stood straighter. Judge said, "Call the matter." Mr. Khanna said, "Appearance for Maya, seeking clarity and time." Omar said, "Pro se, seeking fairness and proper notice." The judge's gaze was a scale that disliked dramatics. Judge said, "Service is acknowledged, and decorum is mandatory." Mr. Khanna said, "We propose a brief schedule to avoid harm." Omar said, "I agree to order, not to silence." The judge set dates that clicked like teeth. Judge said, "You will exchange documents and breathe between sentences." The gavel fell softly, but the sound traveled far. Omar felt rules wrap the chaos until it could walk. On the steps outside, heat rose from the stone like unspoken words. Pigeons punctuated the air with small explosions of gray. Maya called, and the city hushed around her voice. Maya said, "You served him in front of strangers." Omar said, "I served the process so we could stop being strangers." She exhaled, a sound like rain deciding whether to fall. Maya said, "I want mercy more than victory." Omar said, "Order is the only mercy I can promise." A siren braided into the distance, and then let go. He looked at his copy of the receipt and saw a map instead of a weapon. Maya said, "Meet me halfway in truth." He said, "I will meet you exactly there with light on both sides." The day brightened by a fraction, enough to see the next step. Deadlines multiplied like mirrors, and Omar stacked documents until the table learned his pulse. He listed accounts, schedules, and messages, each line a rung above panic. He said, "Facts breathe better when they stand in rows." The checklist did not blink, and he respected it for that. Maya said, "Disclose everything that matters, not everything that hurts." He said, "I do not know how to split those apart yet." The kettle clicked, and quiet folded over the room. Mr. Khanna said, "Provide statements for the last 12 months, nothing less." Omar said, "I will give them clean and numbered." He wrote labels with patient hands, as if naming wind. Memory tried to bargain, and he refused its currency. He said, "We will traffic in dates, not ghosts." The folder swelled and stopped, pretending to be light. He aligned its spine with the edge of the world and breathed. The case management room held the smell of old varnish and new resolve. Mr. Khanna arranged his notes like a chessboard, and Omar chose to be a clock. Clerk said, "Timelines first, tempers later." Mr. Khanna said, "We prefer restricted discovery to avoid burden." Omar said, "Burden is not the enemy of truth." The judge's calendar glinted like a blade that only cut delay. Mr. Khanna said, "No fishing expeditions, please." Omar said, "Only net size to the facts." The clerk tapped keys with a rhythm that disciplined silence. Maya texted, "Please keep this narrow." Omar replied, "Narrow is fine if it fits the truth." The schedule locked into place, and the room sighed. He left with dates that felt like mile markers engraved in stone. He said, "I can carry a map if the map is honest." They met at a cafe that steeped arguments and cardamom in equal parts. Maya said, "I am not your opponent. I am your wound and your witness." Omar said, "You are my history, not my hostage." Steam rose and wrote sentences that vanished too soon. She said, "I hired him because I could not hear you without armor." He said, "I served him because I wanted speech with daylight." Phones rested between them like tame knives. Maya said, "Do not use kindness as a camouflage." Omar said, "I will use it as a boundary." A child laughed near the door, and the sound did not belong to either of them. She said, "Promise to keep our stories smaller than the law requires." He said, "I promise to keep it exact." The bill arrived, and both reached with learned reflex. Their hands stopped before touching, and retreated with care. By evening, rumors arrived dressed as screenshots and counsel. A cousin forwarded a thread that assumed too much and knew too little. Omar said, "Screenshots are mirrors when you want them to be windows." Mr. Khanna said, "We will ignore noise that cannot testify." Maya said, "Tell your people not to weaponize our silence." He said, "I will answer only to the caption and the clock." The group chat sparked and dimmed like a faulty bulb. He muted it and felt the room step closer. The fan carved the heat into swallowable pieces. He printed what mattered and discarded what performed. He said, "I will not feed a fire that does not warm." The night grew strict and removed decoration. His notebook gained 2 new rules and lost an apology. Near midnight, the city hummed like a held breath. Omar spread timelines across the desk and watched dates either embrace or collide. He said, "Sequences character when memory lies." He marked a gap where an email should have lived. Mr. Khanna said, "All materials delivered as per schedule." Omar said, "Then there is a missing day that wants a name." He drafted a polite request that sounded like a doorbell at 2 a.m. Maya said, "Do not make it petty." He said, "Petty is loud, precise is quiet." Rain returned without ceremony and underlined the margins. The printer ticked out a letter that knew how to bow. He signed, scanned, and filed, each act an oath with ink on its hands. The clock rolled past tomorrow, and he let it. Night folded over the apartment while Omar hunted the missing day like a patient diver. He opened an old archive and found a folder dated 2019, with Khanna's name stitched to its spine. He said, "What were you to me before you stood against me?" A scanned retainer surfaced, signed by Mr. Khanna for confidential advice, on Omar's severance. Memory clicked and showed a brief meeting in a cramped office with careful tea. Omar said, "This is not small, this is a boundary." He screenshotted the documents and wrote a calm note to the clerk. Maya said, "I did not know he ever represented you." Omar said, "That ignorance is honest, but the conflict is not." He drafted a motion to disqualify, and the cursor blinked like a witness. The rain slowed, as if the city paused to verify the claim. He printed the retainer and slid it into a new envelope marked Sunlight. Morning sharpened into edges as Omar met Mr. Khanna in the corridor, where fans beat slow verdicts. Omar said, "You previously represented me, which creates a conflict here." Mr. Khanna said, "That matter was unrelated and brief." Omar held the retainer like a small bright shield that did not shout. He said, "It involved financial disclosures that rhyme with today's." Mr. Khanna said, Then put it before the bench and let the law breathe. A junior shifted, papers whispering unease into the tile. Omar noted the time because fairness enjoys timestamps. He said, "This is not ambush. This is confession in the right room." Mr. Khanna's eyes measured ethics and logistics, and chose caution. The hallway watched as procedure carried their words up the stairs. The courtroom held a hush that could hear a page turn across decades. Judge said, on the motion to disqualify, "I will hear both sides." Mr. Khanna said, "Prior engagement was limited and shares no bloodstream." Omar said, "Confidential strategy on finances touches this river." The judge listened, as if weighing stones that looked like feathers. Maya said, "Please do not turn truth into humiliation." Omar said, "I want a fair field, not a wounded opponent." The clerk marked exhibits with a calm that steadied the air. Mr. Khanna said, "I can wall off anything that might echo." Judge said, "Walls built late are still late." Silence pooled, and the room leaned toward the bench. The past and present held hands under the table and did not let go. In chambers, the room felt closer, as if decisions needed less air to burn. Judge said, "I will review the 2019 file in camera and return shortly." Omar stood with still hands that trusted the floor to hold. Mr. Khanna watched the door as if it owed him a reason to stay. Maya said, "If he must withdraw, I will not pretend this is victory." Omar said, "I will consent to a brief delay so no one is harmed." The judge returned with a face that respected discomfort. Judge said, "There is material overlap in financial strategy and timing." Mr. Khanna nodded once as a craftsman acknowledging a hidden crack. Judge said, "Counsel is disqualified, substitution within 14 days, schedule preserved with slight shift." The ruling landed softly but changed the room's gravity. Sun struck the courthouse steps and turned dust into glittering testimony. Maya said, "I asked for armor and got a fault line I did not see." Omar said, "I asked for daylight and found a door I did not plan." Pigeons lifted and settled like commas in a long sentence. He said, "I will not seek sanctions. I will seek a schedule that respects breath." Maya said, "Thank you for not turning a rule into a weapon." The receipt in his folder felt lighter without triumph attached to it. Mr. Khanna approached and said, "I will cooperate in transition with no theatrics." Omar said, "I appreciate that and I wish you steadiness." The city roared past and ignored their tiny treaty. They stood for a moment as former fire and current weather. Then they stepped down into a street that looked almost negotiable. The courthouse woke with the scrape of chairs and the smell of ink. A new name appeared on the docket like a fresh hinge. Advocate Farah Siddiqui said, "Appearance for Maya." Omar said, "Omar, pro se, ready to proceed." Farah said, "I prefer narrow issues and honest paper." He said, "I prefer that too, with dates that stand upright." The clerk arranged files as if tuning a careful instrument. Maya texted, "She is calm and exact." Omar replied, "Then let calm and exact meet daylight." Farah said, "Consider mediation while the schedule firms." He said, "Yes, if truth is the table, not fear." Deadlines clicked into place like teeth choosing their work. The hallway exhaled, and even the fans seemed to agree. Omar wrote the dates in his notebook and underlined "breathe." Mediation gathered them in a small room that smelled of tea and decisions. Retired Judge Hamid said, "Name your goals, not your enemies." Farah said, "Stability and fairness with minimal harm." Omar said, "Clarity that does not punish." Maya said, "A future that leaves no broken glass in our shoes." The whiteboard accepted bullet points without judgment. Hamid said, "Speak in facts, rest in feelings later." Farah drew boxes around finances and timing. Omar opened folders that had learned his heartbeat. He said, "I can stipulate to 3 items and dispute 2. Maya said, "Keep our story smaller than our paperwork." Silence made room, and then tightened again. Hamid said, "You are closer than your fear suggests." They paused at that sentence as if it might hold. After mediation, the apartment felt like a witness on standby. Omar spread bank statements across the desk and traced a transfer few would notice. He said, "This paid the deposit when her mother fell ill." Farah said, "Disclose it and attach proof, not pride." Maya said, "I remember the ambulance and the rain." He said, "I remember the receipt and the quiet." The missing day finally admitted its name without drama. He scanned the invoice and stapled the story to the date. Farah said, "Thank you for filing it first, not last." Omar said, "Truth works better when it is not late." The printer's rhythm steadied the room. He uploaded exhibits until the folder felt lighter. The city hummed like approval trapped in traffic. Case management resumed with fewer edges and sharper lines. "Whoa," Judge said, "we now limit issues to timeline, support, and disclosures." Farah said, "We accept the transfer and dispute the schedule's tail." Omar said, "I propose a midpoint that does not bruise either month." The clerk typed, and the calendar obeyed. Judge said, "Witness lists by Friday, affidavits by Tuesday." Farah said, "No surprises, only citations." Omar said, "No ambush, only light." The room respected the sentence and filed it away. Maya watched with hands folded like a quiet flag. The gavel tapped once, more punctuation than thunder. They left with orders that could carry weight without cutting skin. Night draped the rooftop in salt wind from the sea. Omar rehearsed his testimony to the horizon that never interrupts. He said, "I will speak in clocks, receipts, and choices." His phone chimed, and the screen softened. Maya said, "Thank you for the deposit record." He said, "It belonged to the truth, not to me." Farah said, "Sleep, then arrive early and breathe between answers." He said, "I will show up with quiet and ink." The city lights arranged themselves like a jury that meant well. He pictured the room, the bench, and the simple oath. He said, "I will be exact and I will be kind." The wind tested his balance and found it holding. Tomorrow moved closer without raising its voice. Morning split the courtroom into light and shadow. Omar stood at the witness stand, right hand raised. Clerk said, "Do you swear to tell the truth?" He said, "I do." Farah said, "Please state your name and role in these proceedings." Omar said, "Omar Siddiqui, self-represented respondent." The judge's gaze held steady like a plumb line. Farah began, "Let's discuss the deposit in March 2021. Omar answered, each word like a stone placed carefully in a wall. Maya watched from the gallery, her eyes neither sharp nor soft. The clerk typed steadily, a metronome of record dot. Omar's voice stayed inside the rails, never spilling into drama. The light shifted across the bench as time moved in measured steps. Farah's questions sliced into dates, amounts, and receipts. Omar said, March 3rd, transfer from joint account, paid directly to City Hospital. She held up Exhibit D, the receipt Omar had filed early. Farah said, "Why disclose this now?" He said, "Because it was true then, and remains true now." The judge nodded once, making a note. Maya glanced down, her hands still folded. Omar's pulse stayed slow, anchored by the paper in front of him. Farah said, "Do you dispute any of the petitioner's remaining claims?" He said, "Only the schedule tail. All else aligns." The air felt less heavy, but more precise. Clerk's fingers never paused. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Inside, the next question waited like a key. Cross-examination came from the bench itself. Judge said, "Mr. Siddiqui, do you understand the obligations this schedule imposes?" Omar said, "Yes, and I intend to meet them in full." Judge said, "Even if unforeseen costs arise?" He said, "I will adjust without defaulting." The judge's pen paused, then moved again. Maya's gaze shifted, something like relief brushing past. Farah said, "No further questions." Omar stepped down, the wood underfoot creaking like a stage ending its scene. The bailiff called the next matter, but the air around Omar felt widen. He returned to his seat, the folder lighter in his hands. In his notebook he wrote, "Done without harm." By afternoon, orders were read into the record. Judge said, "Support payments as agreed, schedule modified to midpoint, disclosures accepted." Maya nodded. Farah closed her folder without flourish. Omar said, "I consent to the order as stated." The gavel touched wood like a quiet heartbeat. The clerk printed copies, the warm paper edges curling slightly. Farah said, "We'll file the final draft this evening." Omar said, "Thank you for keeping this clean." Maya said, "Thank you for keeping it human." Outside the windows, clouds thinned and let a strip of blue through. Inside, chairs shifted, and the courtroom began to empty, leaving their case neatly folded inside a file. Outside, the courthouse steps were warm under the first full sun of the week. Omar stood with the stamped order in hand, reading each line as if testing its weight. Maya approached, her expression a mix of tired and light. Maya said, "It's done." Omar said, "It's filed." She said, "Then we walk away from this with our names intact." He said, "And our voices still ours." Farah joined them briefly, said, "If you need, I'll send you certified copies." Omar said, "Please do, for the record and the memory." Traffic roared by, unbothered. The city didn't care about their signatures, but they did. They parted without shaking hands, only a quiet nod. The apartment felt different with the file gone, like a room after the last guest leaves. Omar placed his blazer on the chair and loosened his collar. He said, "It's finished." The clock ticked without judgment. Maya's message read, "Thank you for not breaking what we couldn't fix." He replied, "Thank you for standing in the light, even when it hurt." The air held no tension, only a faint smell of rain from the balcony. He poured tea into a chipped mug, the same one from before lawyers and orders. The steam rose slow, as if time had thickened. Outside, traffic murmured, and the city returned to being just a city. In the evening, Omar walked to the neighborhood tea stall where conversations outlived cups. The vendor said, "Long day." Omar said, "Long case." A radio played old ghazals in the background. He stood beside strangers who didn't know his name or story, and it felt right. The steam from the kettle curled into the air like a gentle question. He sipped slowly, letting the bitter and sweet find their balance. He didn't rehearse arguments or recall dates, only noticed the warmth in his hands and the cool air on his face. The tea stall's neon flickered once, then steadied, like a pulse finding its rhythm again. A week later, the certified copies arrived, crisp and final. Omar placed them in a small metal box where important papers lived. He said, "Here's the proof, not the story." He locked the box and slid it under the bed. Maya called, not for legal talk, but to share that the first jasmine flowers had opened on her balcony. He smiled without speaking, the silence enough. Papers might hold the rules, but not the meaning. He brewed tea again, the routine now a choice, instead of a shield. Outside, the neighborhood kids played cricket under yellow streetlights, their laughter bouncing off walls without permission. Omar visited the seaside at dawn, when fishermen pushed boats into gray-blue water. The air was salt and possibility. He walked the wet sand, shoes in hand, suit trousers rolled. He said to the tide, "We stood in court, and we stood as people." Waves broke, erased his footprints, and invited new ones. A vendor sold chai in paper cups, steam lost to the wind. He drank and watched the sun lift its edge over the horizon. In that light, nothing was plaintiff or respondent, only witness and witness. He let the morning keep its own record. That night, Omar wrote the final note in his notebook, served the process, kept the dignity, left the field whole. He closed it and placed it on the shelf beside the wedding photo, not as a relic, but as a page in the same book. The city outside glowed in 1,000 windows, each with its own quiet battles. He turned off the lamp and let darkness take its place. Tomorrow would not ask for testimony, and that was enough. In the stillness he felt the rare weight of a chapter fully closed.